Time is running out with hours, not weeks, left of the British evacuation effort in Afghanistan. So says the Defence Secretary. And tonight we're at Kabul airport, where the Taliban, alongside their enemy, British troops, decide who gets to leave.
Young members of our armed forces and soldiers from other Western nations have to make that dreadful decision, that choice between who can go and who can stay.
The UK and G7 allies want the US to keep the operation going for just a few more days to get everyone out safely.
I'm in Washington, where the Biden administration has left the door open to delaying America's final withdrawal from Kabul.
But the Taliban are warning there'll be consequences if foreign troops stay beyond next Tuesday. So what happens next? Also on News at 10 tonight. It's Paralympics Eve, with the big opening ceremony kicking off tomorrow. We'll have the latest from Japan.
Rock-a-bye, baby.
And we meet Jacob, the 5-year-old from Aberdeen, taking Bollywood by storm.
This is ITV News at 10 with Charlene White.
Good evening. With each passing minute, the window to evacuate people from Afghanistan is closing, with the urgency rising. Our Defence Secretary was very clear earlier, saying the UK has hours, not weeks, to get its nationals and those who helped our forces out. Their fate is tied to the deadline set by President Joe Biden to get American troops out, August the 31st, because that's when our troops have to be out too. A week tomorrow. So, at Kabul airport, they know that time is running out. Some believe their escape is a matter of life and death. But the people holding the keys to that desperate dream of safety are the same people they're trying to get away from, the Taliban, working just yards from the enemy they fought for years, the British.
The Taliban think they're doing well, facilitating the evacuation of Afghans too terrified of them to stay in this country. These people have waited days to leave Taliban-held Kabul by getting beyond these containers into the UK compound that is the staging post for Britain's exit and for that of as many former Afghan employees and their families as possible. Conditions are grim, but everything is relative. 2 days ago, 7 people died in the melee. Now the misery here is much more organised. The Taliban commander in charge is senior, an emir in their hierarchy. He told me they were doing their best, making it up as they go along. He said they'd been busy fighting over the last 20 years and didn't have any experience when it came to crowd control. Would-be evacuees go through several filters. To reach this point, they had to convince the Taliban they have the right paperwork to flee. Then they wait to be called forward by an interpreter working with the British. And this is the passageway to salvation, a narrow corridor created by placing a container feet from the airport wall. At the end, 2 members of the parachute regiment are in charge of admissions. When they get through, the final gauntlet is a question and answer session and a look at the paperwork to see if asylum really has been granted and safe passage out of here is theirs. So this is the awful point where young members of our armed forces and soldiers from other Western nations have to make that dreadful decision, that choice between who can go and who can stay. Things may look calm, but it felt raw and visceral. These Afghans believe this selection process is about life and death. It's challenging work for our paras, not least because of the close proximity of an enemy some fought in Helmand, losing comrades along the way. Who and what we were able to film, who we were able to speak to, required Taliban approval. the Afghans granted safe passage, were leaving all that behind. They would soon be boarding one of these giant military transports to take them anywhere but here. The tempo of flights picked up today as the world answered the call. The British and the Americans, Italians, Canadians, Germans, Hungarians, Australians and New Zealanders were among those we watched, taking people to the freedom guaranteed beyond. This is what fates were doing nosedive landings, and then taking off, standing on their tails as they made steep climbs to the safety of altitude. The combat maneuvers that some of the pilots are using to get in and out of here are known in the business as K-SANS, after the infamous siege during the Vietnam War. The White House doesn't like Vietnam analogies for obvious reasons, but as was the case in Saigon, the Americans will inevitably leave friends behind here, and so will the British. As we left the entrance to the UK's last post in this country, many Afghans continue to wait in the hope of reaching it, despite the indignity and hardship of doing so.
Well, Joan Irvine spoke to me a short time ago and told me about witnessing the evacuation operation unfold.
Charlene, today is a day my colleagues and I will never forget. We felt immensely sad and immensely uncomfortable at that interface between Taliban-held Kabul and the British-held bit of Kabul airport. We were constantly in the company of Taliban minders who dictated what we could do, what we could film, who we could speak to. I was feet away from a couple of our paras, but I wasn't allowed to speak to them. They didn't particularly want to speak to us because of the company we were keeping. I did manage an aside to one of them saying that in my eyes things looked a little more efficient today. He nodded agreement. One Taliban leader said things were better today because nobody had been crushed to death. Horrible scenes, really. That narrow passageway reminded us of a livestock market rather than something any human being should use. It was quiet where we were. The process was slow, I'm sorry to say, but at other checkpoints there were shooting incidents today. An Afghan soldier still working for the Americans at the airport got killed in a bizarre incident. So things remain very fluid. The good thing about today was the uptick in flights, but I'm concerned that some of these planes are leaving Kabul half empty. This whole episode remains a very sorry mess.
Joan Irvine reporting there from Kabul. Well, for those people hoping to leave Afghanistan, an extension to President Biden's withdrawal deadline could be life-changing. Boris Johnson will lead the call to do just that when G7 leaders hold virtual talks tomorrow about the crisis. But as we saw in John's report, the airport operation is reliant on cooperation from the Taliban, and they're in no mood to give America and its allies more time. So today, they warned any extension would have consequences.
They left on cramped military flights and arrived on comfortable coaches. How does it feel to be in America?
Good, feels good.
Sir, how does it feel to be here?
Till now we are safe.
This was not the end of their journeys, but for now they needn't run nor hide. They'll be housed temporarily here in Virginia. And as they arrived, others did too. A local businessman looking for mechanics who came here to offer jobs.
If they're coming to this country and they're looking for a fresh start and they've helped us, I'd be more than willing to give them a step up in our country.
But it's the many left behind who will be the focus of tomorrow's virtual meeting of the world's leading democracies. Some of America's allies are now being open about their wish for the US to do what it's already considering, extending its deadline to be out of Afghanistan beyond the end of the month.
We are also consulting closely with our allies and partners on the issue of the evacuation and its progress. In fact, the President just got off the phone with the British Prime Minister a short time ago. We believe we're making progress. We're going to keep making progress, and the President will ultimately make his decision about the precise shape and scope of the operation.
Which leaves other countries like the UK with ambitions, but with little ability to independently achieve them.
I don't think there is any likelihood on staying on after the United States. If their timetable extends even by a day or two, then that will give us a day or two more to evacuate people, because we are really down to hours now, not weeks.
There is a more important voice for the US to consider. The Taliban's leadership made clear today that if the Americans aren't gone come September the 1st, it would consider that a clear violation. It didn't say how it would respond.
I'm honored to welcome to the White House the 2020 WNBA champions, the Seattle Storm.
Tonight, President Biden was filmed talking about basketball, saying nothing about the crisis in Kabul.
So it's my honor and privilege to present you this jersey.
But with today's threat from the Taliban to potentially make the dreadful situation even worse, the choice of when to leave might not be his alone.
Well, Rohit joins us now from Washington. Rohit, just how much is that security situation on the ground in Kabul a factor in working out how long US and UK forces can continue evacuating people?
Well, it's the most important factor, Charlene. It will ultimately determine what happens next. It will determine the gravity of the situation for the United States. It will determine the bargaining power for the Taliban. As we saw in John Irvine's report, the situation at the airport is improving slightly, but it is still grim despite all the spin from the US government about the number of evacuations breaking records. There are really two security concerns, two threats on the ground at the airport. Not just the fear that the Taliban will withdraw its relative cooperation, but also the threat considered to be a real one by the Americans that ISIS Khorasan, the IS affiliate in Afghanistan, may well launch some sort of suicide attack among the people who've gathered at the airport attempting to get their way out. And so, yes, the security situation is serious and there is a risk of extreme humiliation or more for the United States. So what is it that is motivating this firm red line for the Taliban? Well, we know that it wants two things. It wants money and it wants international recognition. It may well be that it sees a route towards one or the other through sticking firmly to this deadline.
OK, Rohit, thank you. Let's bring the story back here. We're joined by a political reporter, Shihab Khan. Now, as I mentioned, they've got that emergency G7 summit tomorrow, and Boris Johnson has been speaking to Joe Biden ahead of that, hasn't he?
He has indeed, and they've agreed that they need to coordinate and work together ahead of that big call tomorrow. The Prime Minister will be chairing that. Interestingly, we heard that the two world leaders agreed that they would continue working past that 31st of August deadline that you've heard so much about. What we know is that for some time, the British government has been pushing the US to try and get that deadline delayed, simply because those evacuations will stop if the US support that is in that airport at the moment is pulled out. Now, that will be on the agenda come the G7 talks tomorrow, but there are several other things that will be discussed. We know, we understand, I should say, that there will be discussions about the humanitarian aid, how much aid needs to go into Afghanistan to help the situation, discussions about the refugee targets across these 7 nations, about what they can do to help, and also discussions about the best way to deal with the Taliban moving forward, which is, of course, a significant issue. You've heard from Rohit there about how difficult the situation is. Now, the key thing that I've been told by several sources inside Number 10 is the key word here is unity. Going into these talks, they understand that there needs to be a unified approach across the G7, and working together is the best and arguably the only way to actually deal with a crisis of this scale. So going into this, as the Prime Minister chairs the meeting, it's getting agreement from all 7 nations. OK,
Shihab, thanks very much. Well, the decisions made at that G7 meeting tomorrow will have a direct impact on the lives of so many. Since mid-August, the UK has taken more than 6,500 British nationals and Afghans out of the country, but many remain with their futures far from certain and fearful of what the Taliban might do to anyone with links to the West.
This is what faces former British interpreters stranded in Kabul when they try to get to the airport. Taliban fighters have tightened security on key roads around the city, leaving those who used to work for NATO with little choice but to hide and hope help will come to them.
This is the room where we are hiding.
Around the city, an unknown number of families with links to the West are trapped. Many, like this former British interpreter, have small children with them and are terrified of being discovered.
We are so scared. We scared that if the process stops or if the British forces just withdraw from Afghanistan, it will be very hard for us to leave.
ITV News footage of British passport holders locked out of the safety of the airport met with this blunt response from the government today, which says it must security vet everyone coming here.
Those scenes are desperate. I have every sympathy for UK passport holders who are despairing in the crowd. We're getting through people at best speed, but the safety of troops and our responsibility to do the necessary checks means that we can't just open the gates and get everybody onto flights free for all.
What do you want? Today, former interpreters vented their frustration outside the Home Office at those they say have been left behind. This man's brother worked with British troops but hasn't been given permission to travel here.
A nightmare for them. We have got a contact number. They're only saying, just make your way. How can I make my way if the Taliban are not allowing me?
What are your fears for your brother if he's not rescued soon?
A lot, because right now he's standing in front of a Taliban who we have fought directly in the past 20 years.
Time is running out. The air bridge will soon close, and there are fears the Taliban will then hunt down and kill former British interpreters who they still regard as the enemy. Dan Rivers, News at 10.
Well, as the Taliban swept across Afghanistan, many people fled their homes hoping to find sanctuary. Currently, there are 550,000 refugees spread out across the country, including 72,000 children who arrived in the capital, Kabul, in just 1 week. And with the US currently sticking to its withdrawal deadline, it looks like the escape route via Kabul airport is about to close. At that point, they will either have to stay under Taliban control, or if they decide to flee, they could head east into Pakistan or west towards Europe through Iran. But it seems countries are already blocking potential paths to the west, with Turkey and Greece strengthening their borders. It's creating a situation which the UN has called a humanitarian crisis of incredible proportions.
If the ills of an entire nation could be embodied in the pitiful form of a single child, then she is here, asleep at the side of a Kabul road.
Look, this is our situation.
When she wakes, she says her name is Aisha, that her parents are dead. The man who found and filmed her gave her some money, and his wife took her in. So at least there was one night of safety. But there are many like Aisha, counted across the capital in their tens of thousands. Like this boy we watched as he collected plastic bottles. If he's lucky, he'll make enough to feed his family. These are the people who fled the Taliban and are now stranded. As night falls, home on the curbside, a tent in the park, and nothing more. For hundreds more children, there is makeshift shelter at this school and harsh lessons in new realities. Abandoned once by the West to the Taliban, the warning is that a second betrayal beckons, this time to hunger and homelessness.
We have a humanitarian crisis of incredible proportions unfolding before our eyes. People who had nothing on the run with barely the clothes on their back. They have moved not just once, they have moved twice, they have moved 3 times. Everything is just coming together to be an absolute disaster.
While the world's attention has focused on the desperate drama at Kabul airport, many more Afghans have run out of places to run to. Dependent on an aid effort hugely underfunded and often suspended during the crisis, left to the mercies of the Taliban, the very forces they've tried to escape. John Ray, News at 10.
Okay, let's move away from Afghanistan now. And All 16 and 17-year-olds in England have now been offered a COVID vaccine, but that doesn't mean that they're taking up the offer. Around a fifth of people ending up in hospital with the virus are 18 to 34, many of whom are unvaccinated. So to encourage more young people to get jabbed, a film's been released highlighting the debilitating effects of long COVID. Even with the vaccine, hospital admissions are 10 times higher than a year ago, a figure which leaves many looking ahead nervously, wondering what will happen as England's schools and the cold weather return.
For about 7 months solid, I genuinely thought I might die.
Today, the NHS released this new video imploring younger people to get both COVID jabs.
In hindsight, I wish I had taken the vaccine when I was initially offered it.
Vaccines have now been offered to all over 16 and 17-year-olds. The hope is uptake will be high as schools go back over the next 2 weeks in England and Wales. For this head teacher, vaccination offers a hope of a return to normal.
They need to be playing sports fixtures, they need to be in drama productions, they need to be in concerts, they need to have the normality of school so they can get on with their lives, because they've had that all taken away from them, and we have to stop that.
It's hard to say what will happen when classrooms fill up again, but it won't be the same as last year. The 7-day average of COVID cases in England currently stands at around 27,000. On the same day last year, the case average was around 900. And when it comes to hospitalisations, today they hit 6,000, a high not seen since March. At the same time last year, barely more than 500 were in hospital with COVID. The difference, of course, is the Delta variant, cases of which, despite high levels of vaccination, have been rising slowly for weeks, in some places surging. Vaccines were on offer at the Boardmaster Festival in Cornwall 10 days ago, but nearly 5,000 new infections have now also been linked to the event. But if cases are mainly among the young and vaccines are keeping most of us safe, what's the problem?
At the moment, we have 100 deaths a day. That is 36,000 deaths a year. And that's increasing, week on week. Is that something that people are happy about? I can't see that that should be acceptable. When schools go back, the chances are that the transmission rates will rise, and quite possibly rapidly.
The real test, of course, is what the health service can bear.
We do know that the vaccination campaign will have helped to keep that under control. But at the moment, if we're on over 30,000 cases a day and the number of people being ventilated is rising, we know that that could have a real impact on the NHS.
Last autumn's surge in cases appeared to take officials by surprise. The only surprise this year will be if they don't. And as things stand, it's an unlikely prospect. Tom Clark, News at 10.
Well, in Japan, its COVID levels are still ringing alarm bells, especially in Tokyo. The added complication, of course, is the opening ceremony for the Paralympic Games tomorrow night, a celebration many in the city will struggle to buy into when its healthcare system is already under a lot of strain. But for Paralympics GB itself, the focus is on that golden target that they've been waiting 5 long years for a shot at.
There were waves, peace signs, smiles and sheer joy as Japan's Paralympians led the final day of the torch relay. All the debates leading up to these games dissolved in their pleasure at taking part. The chef de mission of Paralympics GB was given a small-scale but enthusiastic welcome by her Japanese hosts at the Kawasaki Stadium. She told us she is in awe of how the team has prepared in the prevailing pandemic.
I think what has been standout has been the adaptability, the agility, the innovation, the resilience, the determination from both athletes and their support teams.
Leading out the team at tomorrow night's opening ceremony will be 2 of its top medal hopefuls. Ellie Simmons will be swimming in her 4th Games. She was just 13 when she competed in Beijing. John Stubbs is also a Paralympic veteran, going for another gold in archery.
They were absolutely delighted. I don't think they had any idea.
In Tokyo, as the Olympic rings have made way for the Paralympic symbol, protests against the events have continued.
No, Paralympics.
The city has been recording record cases almost every day, despite still being in a state of emergency. Dr. Iwata thinks the Paralympics should have been cancelled.
Now people are very worried about the surge of infections. Now, do people go back to the euphoric status again from like a back and forth kind of things? You know, the Olympic Games and the COVID-19, then again Paralympic? Maybe not. People became more sober and not having a feeling of enjoying the Paralympic game, which I feel very sorry for the Paralympic athletes.
They may commence amid a sobering situation in Tokyo, but we found a Games superfan in the city who helped lift the mood.
People cannot go together, cannot watch the event. I'm sorry for that, and for all the people of the world, that we can see it in the television.
Britain's Paralympians will be kept in a competitive bubble, striving for greatness with families and fans cheering on from afar. Debbie Edward, News at 10.
Team GB's Olympians were given a musical tribute to their success in Tokyo today as one of the Buckingham Palace's greatest traditions returned. Yeah, the changing of the guard was back for the first time since the pandemic began, with Spandau Ballet's Gold among the tunes in their Olympic medley, much to the delight of the watching crowds. It was announced today that one of the stars of Channel 4's Gogglebox, Mary Cook, has died, aged 92.
Well, there's more people living to be over 100, isn't there? There seems to be. I bet the Queen's fed up with sending telegrams. Yeah.
Mary, seen here on the left, was known for her cheeky moments alongside fellow Bristolian Marina Wingrove. Her statement said that she will be sorely missed by the entire Gogglebox family. Football now, and it's been a night to celebrate for West Ham and their star striker, Mikel Antonio. This goal against 10-man Leicester made him the club's all-time leading goalscorer in the Premier League. He netted his second of the match 4 minutes later to complete an impressive 4-1 victory. Finally tonight, in their early years, most young children might do some basic maths and start reading. For Jacob Smith, the latter involved something a little different, learning a movie script in Hindi. That's after he was scouted for a part in a Bollywood film while visiting India with his family. Mimi has become an instant hit, shooting up the Netflix charts. Not that its Scottish star seemed too fazed by his newfound fame.
Jacob is 5 years old and he's just started school in Aberdeen. But when his classmates were sharing stories about what they did during lockdown, well, Jacob's was a bit different. He starred in a Bollywood blockbuster. And what's more, he did the whole movie in Hindi.
That's pretty cool. Had you ever spoken Hindi before? And you learned a whole new language just for the film? Were your cast members impressed?
They think that was cool.
They thought you were cool.
Jacob was travelling in India with his family when a casting agent spotted him. They asked if he would like to be in a film. That film turned out to be with two of Bollywood's biggest stars in what has become one of the country's most popular movies on Netflix.
You're like a superstar. People might be asking you for autographs. How do you feel about that?
Good.
Jacob was seeming to take this newfound fame in his stride, but we had another surprise.
Jacob, I'm a big fan. I watched your movie and...
A Bollywood film critic was on the line ready to deliver his review.
Jacob pulled off an extremely wonderful role that people will remember. And Jacob, many congratulations to you. At such a young age, I wish I had all this talent.
That's your first review that you've heard from the film, and it sounds like, is that a 5-star review?
Yes, definitely. For Jacob, it's a 5-star. Did you enjoy it? Was acting tough at this age?
Yes, I did.
It
was very good.
Are you going to do more movies?
No.
Have you formally retired from your film career?
Yes.
You told me this morning that you did want to do it. You don't.
Not if it comes with interviews like this.
Bowing out on a high, like all the true greats, Jacob knows acting is all about timing. Peter Smith, News at 10, Aberdeen.
Oh, a brilliant way to end the programme. Right, that's it from us tonight, from me and all the team on News at 10. Good night and enjoy the rest of your evening.